Okay. Hey, so we're live now. What's up?
Live.
What's up, Leif? How you doing, man?
Doing well, bro. Let me move the mic out of the way. There we
Move
go.
the mic. Another day in paradise here. Two shy guys at a mic, just having a conversation about all things health, wealth, relationships, and happiness, and also about what's going on in today's world. So hopefully we're having conversations that hopefully inspire and motivate and shed light, or at least edutain, or at least gives you something to critique and think about as you scroll along the social medias, as you crawl along the internets, the web, the world wide web. There, you happened upon two guys who are shy, but we do get on the mic. So um, we are shy, but not shy when there's a mic around, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So Leif, before we got on, we was having a conversation revolving around um, pe- who's gone back to work if they were
Yep.
off during the pandemic, and if so, how are you
Hey, Mark.
doing? How are you doing? So the question is, have you gone back to work if you've had to be off during the pandemic, or maybe you didn't have to be off, or maybe you did work through the whole thing? And I'm just interested we're just interested to hear about some of the things that may have changed if you stopped, or things that may have changed even if you kept working and had to deal with experience some changes even while working, given
Yeah,
that
that's that
we've
too.
gone through a pandemic, and that which is still in play in some shape, in some way or form. And then also, with the protest and the rioting and um, the expression of the expression of the intolerance for injustice and brutality, and some things that's been happening as far as with community, the black community, and in race relations and race issues on all spectrums of the board when it comes to races. So Leif, just to get started, before we got on, I was giving you an example of I didn't stop working through the pandemic. I was deemed essential. So I was an essential worker
Kevin
during
got bumped up to special.
I got, I got leveled up. We talk about getting leveled up. So I got up leveled. I leveled up in the game, but then I got de-leveled. So I don't know. It's like on Mario Brothers when you get the mushroom or whatever, and you're like,
Yeah, exactly. And
then
somebody
you go
takes
back
it back
down.
away.
Yeah, but I got deemed essential, so it was interesting for me to be out during the pandemic and in its height and its climatic form, and just to kind of go through that and see some large changes just happen like in a span of a couple of weeks in society, to where people are cautious and hesitant about being a human,
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
human interaction and stuff like that. In the past, we've had lots of conversations that revolve around uh, human relations, and just being a human being, and just we talk about things like revolve around sociology, psychology, social psychology.
Yep.
We hit all ranges of
Economics, health, wealth, all of that.
we talk about all of it, and a lot of times I approach things from a sociological or psychological paradigm or lens, just given that that's really what my background is. And just it's just interesting to see how fast and how fast it is that you can actually change societal norms, mores, societal paradigms.
Yep.
And if you would have told me this or asked me about this before this happened, I wouldn't have thought that this would be
Nah.
possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Like,
it's
nah.
just in the today's world, with some of the things that we have at our disposal, with some of the tools and stuff that's available to us, like social media, the power of propaganda, the power of media, just the power of just some of these simple tools that we have. It's possible to affect, the hearts and minds of the masses in such a way that they actually make, behavioral changes.
Yep.
So, just in saying that, I kept working, but one of the things that that was different, pre-protesting and post-protesting, is that I'm now more involved in conversations revolving around race relations and revolving around perspectives and how I'm feeling and how, my point of view. So the door is like really wide open for those, maybe for some uncomfortable conversations or conversations that may not have been at the forefront of or a priority as far as their mind and some of the things they wanted to talk about. But it seems that we all have been forced or pushed to have these conversations that in times past may have been uncomfortable, may be uncomfortable now, but they have to be had. So that's one of the things that I've noticed, even though I didn't stop working, but one of the things that I've noticed now that I have experienced the pre-protest and the post-protest era.
This is your time right now, because you used to always have all the P's. Now you got pandemic and protest to wrap in there, right?
So, yeah. This is pandemic, protest, and hopefully by the end of the show we'll talk about peace.
Exactly.
So maintaining peace throughout.
So, question for you: has it? I know you said not necessarily for you, but I'll ask you: has it been uncomfortable in terms of having these discussions? It's like they're not normal for you per se in your environment.
Yeah, in my experience, having these conversations is not my norm. I think I've talked about it in times past to where I used to have a lot of these conversations when I was in college and going through the sociological department at the university. How I saw myself go through some of the changes and metamorphoses as far as my viewpoints and how I was being molded. I saw myself being molded and shaped to take on a certain lens or perspective. And then when I got out, and then I started having these difficult conversations with co-workers and friends, and that helped like reshift me back, or help me evolve even more to the person I am now, to where for a long time I never really looked through that lens. So I just noticed that now I'm having to look through this lens. I'm being forced to. I really don't want to personally, but I'm being forced to. So I have to have these conversations. And just in my personal experience, no, it's not hard. I think we've talked about in times past too, that me personally, I'm used to having awkward conversations. I'm used to being awkward. So I know how to be
the initiator.
I've learned how to settle into just uncomfortable and awkwardness, just settle in and just sit in it and enjoy it. So I've learned how to manage those conversations and deal with it. It's a good, I appreciate these conversations and things too, but I try not to allow myself to get caught up emotionally, too invested to the point to where my personal peace is rocked or my personal peace is at stake. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Okay.
For myself, obviously, I've been working from home for quite some time, so I don't really necessarily have those conversations in person per se. I've talked to some people about it. I talked to a gentleman earlier this week, and he was just giving me a rundown of his own personal work and how these things have impacted him, because the guy, he actually lived in New York, a few blocks away from the protest. So he talked about those kinds of things and how it's made him rethink some stuff. As well as I know I'm part of like a design group on Facebook, and there have been conversations about people that have returned to work, and I see is one young lady, she talked about quitting her job because of their insensitivity toward the whole protest movement. So it's very interesting, the dynamics of it in terms of returning to work in your work environment.
Okay.
and
Yeah.
especially depends on where you live,
Yes.
because numbers vary in terms of the dynamics, the diversity dynamics within the workplace.
Right.
And so if you live like we do in Kentucky, chances are if you go into work, you're depending on where you work. I'll put it that way. Depending on where
Yeah.
you work, you may be the only one. What's going on, Doc? Steve said, "What conversations are we talking about?" We're talking about returning to work. If you've returned to work post pandemic, post protest, what things have changed, what are the dynamics like, or if you haven't returned to work, which kind of like I'm kind of in between that. If you haven't returned to work, are you worried about the possibility of going back? And so I'll talk on that some from my
Yep.
perspective,
We can
because
talk
I
about
do a
that.
variety of different things. But again, yeah. So I was really interested in listening to some people converse about this, and I'm only speaking secondhand because, like I said, I'm not in that environment, so to speak. However, I know that conversations have changed and approaches have changed to quite a few things with the people I have talked to. So, for example, I know we talked about it in times past, how like I'm really interested in the health of Black people in medical facilities. And so a friend and I, we've been doing some research. We've been really looking into it on a local level. And this was before the Floyd protest, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor protest started to occur. So the dynamics in our conversation early on have changed quite a bit. And this is within a matter of a few weeks.
Yeah.
And the dynamics have changed in a sense that, for good, for better or worse, whatever, a lot of people are like, oh, we'll throw money at these causes. Whether it's sincere or not, I don't personally care in a
Right.
sense. Sincerity in business terms is very, very, very loose term, right?
Okay.
I'm not necessarily concerned about, whether they're sincere or not, more so than I am where their spend actually goes and how they're planning on spending that money and the availability of it. So anyway, those are some things that the race conversation, of course, has picked up quite a bit from the art perspective. A lot of industries are like, oh, we're going to reach out now, and because we know our representation is low, so we're going to reach out and have these conversations with people, which again, in and of itself, is a good thing. The timing is always suspect when stuff happens. It's like, what about yesterday? But again, I don't necessarily get so caught up in that
Yeah.
because
So
go ahead.
you're saying that you necessarily don't let your feels get in the way
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Like I push emotion to the side quite a bit.
okay.
And again, and only because I understand how companies work. And I understand, and I'm not saying that I'm like the expert or anything like that, but I
Right.
understand the dynamics in terms of relationships.
Yeah.
For example, and I'll get back on course with the conversation. For example, like, the whole defund the police movement that's going on across the country. One of the mayors, I believe it was Los Angeles, he said he's going to take $150 million out of the police budget and police fund, but I think they have like $1 billion, like $6 billion or something like that.
That was New York, or I know
Yeah.
New York got
Yeah,
6 billion.
that was the New York one, but the Los Angeles guy was the first one, I believe. The one in California is one of the mayors in California.
Okay.
I don't know exactly which
Well,
one I'm thinking is Los Angeles. Anyway,
yeah.
and I was like, if you're talking about from a perspective of caring, then it's like, I don't believe it. Because most politicians, when they run, they try to get the backing of the police. And so, it happened here locally when one of the mayors were running. They were like, yeah, I'm pro police and all of this. And as soon as they got in office, they defunded their pension. Yeah,
Wow.
this was in. Yeah, I ain't gonna say much, but yeah, it happened in recent years from the standpoint that it's easy to look up. And so they ran on one thing, and then when they got in office, like, okay, I don't need you anymore. Take that money. And so So to me, this is kind of the same thing in terms
Okay.
of, what's going on across the country, because it was so easy to do. And if it was so easy to do, why hadn't this stuff taken place? But like I said, that doesn't matter for me, in the sense of, okay, where's that money going to go and how can it be utilized for the people they say they're trying to help? And so, from a workplace conversation point, I wonder what those offices are like in the government, in the city governments of these places, where, and also, have they even returned to work? I don't think a lot of city governments have actually returned to work yet, like in
I
terms of being there. Because I
I
know
don't think
people,
so either.
yeah, I know a lot of people here are working remotely.
Yep. And I know, there's still quite a few states under lockdown, I think, right?
Yeah, and so
Yep.
that's why I was like, it's really interesting how this is working. Okay, so Doc said, Dr. Steve Oliver, he said he's terrified cases are still rising, so going back is only driven by economics. Yeah, that's always the case. So go ahead.
You
You had a
good.
breath. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, let's see. And then Tamar, she had a comment earlier, said we had stations, temperature checks, questionnaires. Then we get to an area if we're good. If not, we couldn't even get in. So basically, they're temperature scanning their employees on whether or not they can get in the building. And so, if your temperature is good, you can enter in. If not, then you got to go back home. And so, I don't know. It's definitely, yeah, it's just different for quite a few people. I had a friend that she returned to work at the top of this week, and I hadn't talked to her since she went back. Because a lot of people got used to working from home, and some
Yes.
people are trying to go back to the old model of like, no,
Yes.
I need to see what you're doing, kind of thing, so I can
Okay.
micromanage. So
Gotcha. Well, on that note, I know somebody who I know quite a few people who didn't want to go back,
yeah,
and they were, perfectly fine. And, I think a lot of people, some people, I've heard, from some people that they were perfectly happy being home with family and, realizing, I think some people realize some of the things that they might have missed when it comes to raising kids and being around people and
yeah,
relationships and stuff. So I think this may have been an eye opener for a lot of people. And it goes back to something that we often talk about with respect to taking advantage of these times to set up or implement things or set up something to where you can start building your life around what more, the way that you want it
yeah,
versus, just going back to the old model or a model that you're not happy with.
yeah.
So just taking this time, again, taking these times to really build your own ship or build your own raft boat to where you can hopefully set up something or where you can design something more around the way you like it.
Yeah,
So
now's the time is to do that. Like we keep talking about those perfect storm scenarios,
yes,
and right now the leverage is in the hands of the employees in a
yes,
sense, to where it's like, hey, this model's already been proven. And then, just like Doc was saying, I call him Doc Steve, like he was saying, is, if you have a tangible, legit stress about like, hey, I don't know if this is still safe,
yes,
to go back, then they technically can't make you go back. And so this is the time, like to assert yourself, and like you said, figure out what works best for you.
yes,
And from an economic standpoint, protest aside, I'm interested in seeing what this is going to look like for just spaces, period. Like in terms of office spaces, office complexes, gathering places, buffet, restaurants, all of these things were that center around people gathering. So
yes. Well, this, I think this alludes back to a common trend that we often talking about the shift, the paradigm
yep,
shift, or to the industrial revolution, as it's called by some, and that this 2020 right now is the unveiling of the new system.
Yeah.
And we're in the process of the transference or the changeover. We're in the middle of it right now, and we don't get these changeovers often. They only come like every 100 years or 50 years or so. They only come every so often. And right now we're in the middle of it. And you were talking about 2020 is not over, and I think that right now we're in we're in the eye of the storm. I think you're talking about the perfect storm. To
Yeah.
me, this feels like you're coming up for air, you're getting a little breather, and you're getting ready for what's to come next. Because, and I'm just saying this because when I listen to a lot of live streams and talks and stuff, people in prominent positions are talking about, well, there could be a dark winter, or there could be a set, pandemics come in
Yeah.
waves.
Yep.
If you still have people on lockdown and people losing jobs, you got, a whole segment of society is going through a lot of different tough changes.
Yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
there's still a lot of pent up energy and a lot of pent up frustration that can be hijacked, which we are seeing in real time of real legit response and
Yep.
reactions, and how it can be hijacked and used for a broad range of agendas, depending on who's doing what, as far as what group
Yep.
is taking advantage of this situation at the time. So I feel like we're in a breather right now. So it behooves us to shore up and get our mindset right, which is really at the crux of our talk today. We just never really got to it. The crux of the talk is stemming from an article, that I sent you, that I looked at earlier, talking about our COVID and current social unrest creating chronic stress, and
Oh
just
yeah.
talking
Of
about,
course.
of course, but when you make statements, you have to back them up,
Yeah. Of course.
go through numbers, and just look at some things, and just looking at how in this time a lot of people are really going through some tough situations, and there's spikes in all areas as far as domestic abuse,
Yep.
suicides, people mentally having some tough situations and not knowing how to cope, depression, anger, anxiety. I know people personally that are dealing with anxiety and stuff, and this is one of the threads that we often come back to, because some of the stuff, I personally had to put some work in and actually go through myself. So
Yep.
this is why I often come back to some of these common themes and threads revolving around, making sure your health, making sure your wallet, your wealth, making sure your relationships, and making sure that you have purpose, and that you're content in life, so that you can maintain and cultivate peace in the midst of protest and pandemic.
Yeah, and even going back to those stressors, let's see. I'll speak on the comments real quick. Kimberly said, as a
Oh yeah, go
massage
ahead.
therapist, they want us to wear gloves and masks and gowns, even goggles, when they return to work, and
Oh
it's almost
man,
impossible to do that as a
yeah,
massage therapist with all the PPE. And
that
then,
undermines the whole
yeah,
experience.
and then Steve talks about the fact that no more mega churches, that kind of stuff, because we'll see how that works out, because some people are going back regardless. Kimberly just said depression is on the rise for sure. She knows a client who hasn't left her house since March 1st.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, like, what's funny is my wife makes me leave the house, because otherwise I wouldn't leave the house. Like, I'm dead serious.
And I
Uh,
was gonna comment on that too. The picture
yeah.
I seen of you all taking a hike.
Yeah. So like stuff like that, like for certain things, I'll leave the house in a heartbeat. But for regular mingling and things, nah, that's not happening. It's like I have to have like a legit reason to exit my house. But again, I know I'm not the norm, in a sense of people that have to go out on a regular basis. And so I've built up a tolerance over the years. Like when I was young, like you can keep me in the house with nothing. But as I've gotten older, I'm like, man, I've done everything. I don't care about what's outside. But yeah, that stuff can definitely be depressing. And also, not only that, but cabin fever can get built up and all of that. We made sure, even at the height of the pandemic, that we got our kids out at least for drives, took them for drives just to, see scenery, see anything other than inside the home. So for those that aren't leaving, I know that can cause stress in and of itself. And as if the pandemic weren't bad enough for a lot of people in terms of worrying about the fear of infection. And it was a real legit fear because plenty of us have died from it. I know quite a few people, like I mentioned on shows past. I don't think I've had a time in my life where I've known more people that have died within a short period of time, where I've actually known the people that have died. Usually it's over a span of, over throughout the year. Of course, people are going to die. It's just the attrition of, human beings. It doesn't make it any less sad, but still within the short amount of time that it happened, it's like, wow, okay. Definitely wasn't expecting that. So that can cause stress for a lot of people, especially, if you watch too much news, if you stay on social media too long, and like during when the protests first started, I couldn't go to sleep. I couldn't focus on anything else. Like normally I'm drawn or something. I couldn't focus. I was just like, I was just so, just looking at all the examples of the wrongdoings that keep happening and all of that. And so, I was like, that stuff can definitely wear on you,
Yes.
especially if you don't have a reprieve from it. So be very careful. It's one thing to be informed, and it's another thing to have it hijack your daily routine. So definitely watch out for that. And then not only that, not only just paying attention to what's going on, but even going back to the workplace conversations. And you don't even have to be physically at work to have those conversations about because you have all of these microaggressions, or because I understand that not everybody thinks the same way.
Right.
Like for me, it took me a while, like especially being married and those kinds of things. It took me a while to understand that okay, not everybody thinks the way I do.
Right.
And so for me, somebody throws out a microaggression, I'm quick with it. So I'm going to respond instantly. Whereas other people, it just takes other people a while to maybe they don't know how to deal with it, or, they shouldn't have to be honest. But even in those situations, not everybody is a type A aggressive personality that can snap back in an instant. Right. What's going on, Miles? And so for a lot of people, those kinds of, interactions can be taxing, right? It can wear on them. It can make them fatigued mentally, and it can cause undue stress. So if that's you, then if you don't know how to deal with it, then find an advocate of some sort. I don't know of all the different workplace advocates. It's not my familiarity. However, you still have an HR if you work for a decent sized company. You need to have the conversations with them. And right now, this would probably be a good time, especially if you feel that you've been microaggressed, so to speak. And go ahead.
Offended in some way.
Offended, because I know people have talked about it during Zoom meetings, like certain things will be said, and I'm like, oh, why don't you just do X, Y, Z? But that's not that's not everybody's personality. And again, you shouldn't have to. That's one thing I always say. A lot of this stuff you shouldn't have to. So that's a new dynamic. Well, not even a new dynamic, but it's the elephant in the room that a lot of people don't know how to address.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, because it may have been there before, but it wasn't part of national conversation.
Okay.
And so that makes it more difficult to get around, especially if you're, like David Goggins says, if you're the only, when you walk into a place and you're the only, then all of the weight of that, typically falls on you. And it shouldn't, and it doesn't have to. So make sure that, again, if things are like that are happening in your workplace, that you reach out to HR, human resources. And if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, then there's other means and measures you can take to alleviate some of those issues.
Well, I thought that one of the key things that you said that I've learned to do is, like you said, realize and recognize and understand that everybody doesn't think like I do. So just learning how to take on somebody else's perspective no matter how repulsive or how much I don't agree, just learning how to just detach and put on their mindset. Learning how to just put on somebody else's mindset is definitely, it can definitely be a useful tool in your toolkit of things when it comes to relationships and interpersonal uh, interactions on a daily basis, wherever you may be. And just maybe thinking about some framework and
Yeah.
some mindsets to really have in your pocket that you can just slip on whenever you can. Like I think I'm the opposite of you. You said you're very you're direct. You're very you get back. I'm more of a tap dancer. I'm more of a I'm more of a beat around the bush. I'm more of a tiptoer. I'm more of a colorful language. You know, little wordplay. Hopefully, hint at things. You got to read between the lines. Hey, that's what I am.
I'm not gonna be confrontational at all.
Let's just keep the peace. Let's keep this train moving. Because the only thing I really care about is getting a good meal and getting some good sleep and everybody's safe.
Kevin at the end, he's like, I'm still gonna get my check, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm still gonna get paid, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's all good.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely feel for people in those circumstances or predicaments. And also even again, because one of the things that really made me think about even this conversation, I was, I guess it was a YouTube podcast, so to speak. And it was, so I follow a lot of people in the animation and design industry. And so for a lot of them, they've been working from home for like, from the beginning of the pandemic, and they probably won't return back to work for quite some time because they don't necessarily need to. And so they were just, talking about, the permanence of working from home and how that feels. On the one hand, there are bonuses to it, but on the other hand, it's like, sometimes I want to be around other people directly and get the feedback, immediately. Because sometimes, the screen can feel like a barrier for some people in terms of communication and just, I don't know, just meetings and things like that. So they were talking about, the ups and downs, the pros and cons of not actually physically being around their coworkers in a studio environment, because I know some people have actually worked more hours being home than they are at work because they don't know how to turn it off.
Yes.
There's no delineation between work and life. And so that's been difficult for some people as well.
So some ways to cope with this new norm, of new reality, just to really kind of come back to the article a little bit is, just talking about, like you talked about, developing some kind of routine that's going to help you kind of maneuver and mitigate through this new norm for some of us.
Yep.
And the basics that we always talk about is get regular exercise, which is one of the best ways to cope. Make time to engage in pleasantly challenging activities like reading, painting, writing, drawing, something. Taking deep breaths and stretching. Get outside and get some sunlight. Get plenty of sleep.
Yeah.
If possible. Get plenty of sleep and nap if you're feeling run down. Eat a nourishing diet that includes balanced meals, emphasizing whole foods, which can help you manage anxiety. And this is one of the key things that for me was very essential as far as anxiety management and coming back to a place of contentment and peace is just finding some nourishing food and then having something to look forward to.
Yep.
Just having hopeful, anticipatory thoughts, leaving less room for negative thoughts and worry, and then trying mindfulness training, meditation is something that is definitely essential when it comes to coping and when it comes to just coming back to a place of peace. Avoid becoming overly absorbed in the 24/7 news cycle. Find ways to gain a sense of control, such as by creating a schedule and boundaries for yourself. And then try journaling, avoid alcohol and drugs, which I think many,
Yeah, it's on the
look at.
rise. Yeah,
It's on the. I know
alcohol and drugs are on the rise right now.
you want to avoid it. You can't. We don't want, or do we want this to be a perpetual party during the panic and
Yeah,
protest? I'm not sure if that's what you want, but it can definitely make things a lot worse, which is coming out in numbers. Connect with others to talk to about your feelings, like over the phone or during Zoom or FaceTime, music. There's all kinds of things. And then, just along with that, just talking about some solutions, some things that are practical that we can all do. I ran across an article on Dr. Caroline Leaf's website.
okay.
If you don't know anything about her, we've mentioned her in past shows. I've talked about a lot of her books. She talks about the power of mind and how it shapes and affects gene expression, but also it shapes and affects our brain, which,
Yep, yep.
controls the body. But she's got a couple of books out, Dr. Caroline Leaf. And on her blog, she had a writer who, talking about a window into the current emotional mental space of Black America through the lens of a Black therapist. And one of the things that jumped out to me was, in times past, we talked about what can the average person do when it comes to responding?
Yep.
What can we do in our lives? And he said the same thing that we've talked about, is that whatever it is that you do, express yourself through that. Like he said, if you're a blogger, blog about it. If
Yep.
you're a journalist, report accurate information and use the platform for good. He talks about, whatever you are, just use that as a means of affecting whatever change in whatever way that you can. Every small nick can help to make a giant change.
Yeah, and also, see, there was something you mentioned earlier, and I lost the train of thought. It was one of the points. Um, anyway, yeah. So yeah, I definitely agree with those things. I can't remember the point. If it comes to my mind, I'll mention it. But one of the things that I think about with all of this is the goal standpoint of having a goal can definitely change your outlook on the day. And each day being it's a new thing depending on how you look at life and timelines and that kind of stuff. Having a goal on a daily basis can change and alter your mindset of the day and how you perceive what the day is. And so just going through life aimlessly will make you more stressed, will make you more anxious, and all of those things because you have nothing to really anchor you. Anchor your soul, whether it be through religion, reading the scriptures, or whether it be just talking with people that, just not having a plan for the day can just shipwreck you in so many ways. And with that in mind, like you talked about with social media and the 24/7 news cycle, make sure that you at least set a goal to set that aside. I remember one guy, he was talking about, I don't know if it was James Clear, I don't know if it's somebody else, but he
Cal
said
Newport.
what he said that they reset their passwords on they take off they log out of all their social media, but before they do it they change their passwords and delete them from off of their phones. So if they want to get back on it, then it's troublesome for them to do so, right? And because you want to make that as inconvenient as possible to get back on the thing that's going to distract you and depress you. And for a lot of people, social media, especially for black women index higher in terms of stress when it comes to social media. That's why I was talking with somebody that got off of social media, and that was one of the things that they told me. Studies have shown, because one, black women are attacked more often on social media than any other subgroup, as well as the things that are perpetuated through social media is not very conducive for a healthy lifestyle. So I admonish anybody, even if you're watching this show, if you decide right now, like, I need to get off, then get off. If it stabilizes your well-being, and just make sure that you limit that stuff. Yeah, Desiree, she said she needed to unplug this week as well. And you have to. One of the things that I'll shout out to my dude, Randeep. I was talking to him Monday and I was just like, telling him, I was like, yeah, man, I got caught up at one point and I didn't know what to do. And he was like, look, man, he said, in terms of like the racial stuff going on, he was like, hey, he said, you've lived it all your life. So, you get a pass, right? You don't necessarily have to be proactive in everything. And I was like, yeah, that's a good point, And so just keep in mind, you don't have to be that person that, some people thrive in this kind of environment. They're made for it.
Yes, that's what it's,
Whether good, bad, or indifferent, right?
Yeah.
So good, bad, or indifferent, some people are made for it. So they're gonna push and push to get you involved and all of that. But if it's not you, then it's not you, period. I'm always about, the whole phrase, stay in your lane, but, lanes make highways and those kinds of things. So don't be afraid to take a day off. Nobody requires you to do any of that. Like seriously. And a lot of times we put more pressure on ourselves than what is necessary. And, so just do that. Even if you are part of the groups that are going out and actively setting up resistance and those kinds of things, from a protest standpoint, take shifts. Not everybody that works at a company works every day. There's shifts. So because you have to be able to wind down, even look at with the civil rights era movements and all of that kind of stuff, they had shifts. And so you got to keep that in mind and make sure that you don't get overwhelmed. And the difference between then and now is the fact that the 24/7 news cycle keeps you locked in. And again, you plug yourself in so you can unplug yourself as well. So never underutilize your ability to unplug ever. And just keep that in mind. And I know the times that I've done it recently, even the past few weeks. I was like, you know what? I'm not getting on social media today. I'm just gonna, just do what I need to do and refocus. And it, changed my whole energy. It changed my whole drive for the day. And so, my wife and I, we talk about it. It's like, hey, if I notice that she's on social media too long, I was like, you need to take a break from it. And likewise, she'll do the same for me. And so just make sure that you have those checks and balances in place so that you don't want to induce your own stress.
Yes.
Because things can happen, things will make you mad, all of that kind of stuff. And now, it's happening so frequently. I'm wondering why. If you know what I'm saying. So it's like I always wonder why. And so just take a step back. And even now, for everybody, it's a good time to even check your own emotions and why these things make you emotional. Right?
Yeah. When you were talking, you were making me think of Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, when you were talking, that's what I was thinking of. Yep. And how, they use social media to manage and mess with emotion, with the emotions of the users.
Yeah.
And when you can have somebody approach life from an emotional state, they are more manageable and they can be moved like a herd. They can be moved in whatever.
And not only that, you can manipulate their hormones through that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of Dr. Caroline Leaf talking about, thoughts instigate I forgot what I want to say. A process of chemical responses with hormones. Your thoughts trigger responses that have physiological effect, which creates a loop of your physiological effects, can affect how you feel, and that can affect how you think.
Cortisol releases and all of those things. And so you got to be very careful. Your mind is a precious thing,
Oh man,
made me think about the United Negro College Fund. Mind is a terrible thing to waste, but it's a very precious and delicate thing. You can fortify it, but you can also cripple it as well. So you want to be very careful of the kind of information you take in. And if you don't, sometimes even when you thoroughly understand the information you're taking in, it can still be devastating to you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you have to be definitely, keep that stuff in mind when you're on, social media, because there's a lot of people that I've just muted, friends, foes, whatever. I've just muted because it's like I'm just tired of hearing certain things. And it's not even necessarily that what they were saying was bad. I just didn't want to just
Yeah.
participate or even come across any of that stuff. So I'll make sure that, I clean up my own timeline of information that I take in. And
Yes.
and again, for me, having goals also makes me aware of it, because anything that's not helping me work toward my goal is taking me away from it. So having that goal in place, having that to-do list that I look at when I wake up or anything like that, it helps regulate what I do, focus on throughout the day. And if I catch myself, it's like, oh, why am I on this? I don't need to be watching this. I need to be focused on this.
Yeah.
Then it actually helps keep my brain clean, so to speak.
It's an easy way
Yeah.
to set up a system that you don't have to consciously think about. It just, you set something on autopilot, and it
Yep.
makes it easier when it comes to mind management.
Yeah.
Hey, are there any more comments or anybody else?
Not right now. No. That was the Desiree and Miles were the last ones to comment, talking about the need to unplug
Oh,
and
okay.
histrionic people. But yeah, so anyway, for those, again, though, we're talking about work, we're talking about stress, and the pandemic. And yeah, I said I was going to get to it. So for me, I haven't quite returned to work. So for those of you that don't know, I work with kids during the summer and also during the school semester. So during the summer, so I didn't return to work because there was no summer school. So like we run a code camp through the summer. We've been doing it for the past 2 years. And this year, of course, we didn't do it because they didn't even really finish school. They did, but
Right.
they didn't. So that was, in terms of that was a loss of income for me. I wasn't really sweating it because, again, I was fortunate enough to have other stuff happen before all of this transpired. So, but, I keep thinking it's not a guarantee that I'll ever be able to return with the school system, or at least not in the way that we did, so that will cause, us to change our approach, perhaps, in the way we interact with the school district and work with kids and those kinds of things, because it's still not even guaranteed that kids will be in school come this fall.
Right.
Because think about it, all the things is like right before they were like, no public gatherings, and then then the protests hit, and then like Steve said, I mean, because I think he still might be in New York. Dr. Steve is, that's prime location for infection, right? And so it's all of these different things going on that makes the world, kind of scary for some people. It just makes it volatile. And if you're not used to living in uncertainty, and what I mean by that, especially for those that haven't returned to work, I've been baptized and washed in it over and over as an entrepreneur. So uncertainty is just an average day for me. But for those that aren't used to it, it can be extremely stressful.
Unnerving.
Yeah. No, it can be damaging, like physically, it can be cancer causing damaging to your health. And that's something that people may not be ready for. And so I'm, just want to tell you guys, make sure that you focus on your health. If you're not at work yet, then get outside if you can. I know in New York it's not quite the same, in terms, because that causes stress in and of itself, depending on where you live, and if you live in a big city. So if you have the capabilities, get outside, get some fresh air, walk around, walk in place, do some exercises, turn off all equipment in your house if you have to, and just refresh your mind. Focus on, the scriptures say, whatever, so things are just and lovely and kind and fair, think on these things, right? There, just think on the good things of life and be thankful, and, relieve some of that cortisol that's pumping through your blood. And so you can get some dopamine release and feel good, and have your body replenish itself, get some good oxygen, take time to breathe. All of those things. Just make sure that you watch your stress levels. Pay attention to your own anxieties. Quit paying so much attention to the world around you. It's good to check in, but you don't have to stay there. So just keep an eye on it. If you're in the thick of the protest, be mindful of what you're doing and why you're there, and be careful even in that, because
Yes.
again, don't let other people rally your emotions for you.
Yes.
Don't let them like you said, dictate to you how you govern yourself in any given situation. Groupthink is very real,
Yes.
and so you want to make sure that you're very mindful of all those things. Ms. Cheryl said, peace and understanding. Yeah, the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your heart and mind in Jesus Christ, Christ Jesus. Yeah, and that's the thing. Just meditate, like daily
Yes.
meditation, daily prayers. All of that stuff is very useful, is very pertinent, and it can help safeguard you.
Yeah, you talk about meditation. There was a link to that, linking to another article about that too, talking about meditation and mindfulness, and just the importance of how that's becoming a more growing practice that's helping a lot of people. And
Yeah,
just thinking about,
can you post those articles in the Two Shy Guy group when we get off?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but just talking about that, and that's you know that's why I sent you that video of talking about the Bible as meditation literature, and
Yeah.
how it's meant to be murmured. It's meant to be in a quiet moment in your life to just every day sit down and think about and read out loud to yourself. And it's part of the reprogramming of
Yep.
your mind on a continuous basis to help manage it and help it keep creating those positive, healthy growth trees that Dr. Caroline talks about. How you can physically see positive thoughts, and you can tell the difference between negative thoughts
Yep.
physically. Um, that's what she says. I don't know, So
Yeah.
um,
It could be a way of thinking about it in terms of neuroplasticity.
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly,
yeah.
yeah, exactly what it
Yep.
is. Yep.
Yep.
You could tell, when you look at it in that way. Um, so just talking about that, and that's all I really had for the discussion today.
Yep.
We started off with what changes have taken place since you went back to work, if you had to miss, or even if you didn't have to miss. Pre pandemic and protest versus post pandemic and protest. How are things looking in the workplace, but not only in the workplace, in other areas of your life too. How are you coping? How are you dealing? Don't let yourself get too stressed, and learn how to find ways to help yourself cope and get through and manage very well.
Yeah. And one thing that I will say, because I just thought about it as you were talking before we jump off, is especially for Black people going back to work in a predominantly white society, set boundaries on your own conversation. You dictate that. Don't let somebody else dictate that to you. And what I mean is, and again, I've been watching quite a few talks about, because my focus is on people in the entertainment, and a lot of talk being out there and having to answer all of these questions or whatever. Set up your own boundaries. Like, hey, don't come to me with XYZ. This is not the day. Make an announcement if you have to, because you have to protect your own mind. And this is what we're talking about in terms of the stress and those kinds of things. Watching TV reports or news reports through your news feed, that alone can be stressful enough. And then let alone talking to people, having to quote unquote explain things. You don't have to do that. So set up your own boundaries. And if you're like Kevin and you like to tap dance, just write a note and stick it on your shoulder or something. Just pose it out there so that way you don't get overly stressed for lack of a better term, some nonsense. So just make sure you set those boundaries. And again, people could be well intentioned and well meaning, but again, it's not for you to relieve the stress of the world. So you make sure that you set those boundaries for yourself, and the way people treat you. And this is in all aspects of life, really. It goes beyond just the conversation of race and what's happening politically. But again, you dictate how people treat you for the most part, not all the time, but for the most part, you dictate
Right.
how people treat you. So set those boundaries and set them early, and be resolute and adamant about those boundaries just to protect yourself. So that's it.
All right.
Sign us
Peace,
out, brother.
love, Peace, love, and hair grease. Thanks for joining Two Shy Guys and a Mic. Just here having hopefully conversations that do a number of things: inspire, motivate, educate, edutain, or just give you something to criticize and complain about. Whatever suits your fancy, we can take it. So thanks for joining us. We don't take your time or attention for granted. It's definitely a finite resource that we appreciate you spending with us, and hopefully you get some kind of return on your investment, 30, 60, 100 fold. So whatever you get returned, please share it back to us in return. we can have a prosperous circle of prosperity going on here. So that's all I got. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
All right, take care, everybody. Peace.
Out there. Peace.